Sir John Redwood. Good morning, Sir John.
Morning, Kevin.
Let's talk about the barge. I mean, whatever you think of the system whereby we're going to put migrants on barges, down in Portland in Dorset, so far, it really is not working out well, is it?
Well, it's much better to stop the small boats, and that is the promise, and that's what I would like to help the Prime Minister do. And my advice to the government today is don't have this long conversation about the overall European human rights position with some kind of manifesto pledge for a year or more's time. You've got to solve the problem now. And the legal fix now is to get Parliament back and put through a very short, simple piece of legislation which instructs all British courts to say it is Parliament's will we take these necessary actions to stop the boats, notwithstanding anything that the European Court might have in mind. And if you did that, the European Court ruling on that would disapply without having to get out of the whole thing and cause all that kind of row, and you'd get an instant result. And I don't know why the Cabinet doesn't see this and why it doesn't get on and do it.
I mean, so far, I mean, it really has been a ludicrous saga. That boat, the Bibby Stockholm, which has been sailing around the world for 50 years, nearly 50 years, it's never once had a fire. It's housed migrants, homeless people, many construction workers for a long time here in the Shetlands, then in Holland. Suddenly it gets here and it's described as a floating Grenfell, a potential inferno, and that delays the process. Then we finally get to the point where we start to load the estimated 500 or so migrants onto the barge. And so far, after, what is it now, 3-4 days, there are 20 on board. And many of the rest of them are refusing to go on board. A, because mysteriously some of them have developed an extreme terror of water, and others don't feel the accommodation is up to their required standards. I mean, I know this is going to sound heartless and probably terribly fascistic and all that, but why on earth do we give these people who arrive in our country illegally, why do we give them legal aid to hire immigration lawyers who, frankly, make up lies? These people are not terrified of water. This is a ploy. Why do we facilitate this ludicrous process?
Well, I'm pleased to see the Home Secretary and other ministers saying that some lawyers have been misbehaving and that they intend to take action and, if necessary, prosecute them. I agree with you. But it comes back to this point that we don't want the people coming in the first place because they're putting their own lives at peril, particularly those who make the small boat crossing, which many of them do. And we are meant to be stopping that. And so why isn't it stopping? Well, it's because many people think they're going to get away with it. They think the risks on the sea crossing are not sufficiently worrying, or they will be rescued, because we do a pretty good job at rescuing many of these people. And so we need to show them, by the legal action we now take, that they are not going to get a free passage as economic migrants into this country, and that would then get rid of the pull factors, which are obviously leading many of them to queue up to try and spend a lot of money on a very dangerous crossing. You'd have thought today of all days, when we just heard dreadful news of more drownings with people trying to do this kind of thing in the Mediterranean, those who are very worried, as I am, about the welfare of these people would see that you've got to stop them getting on the small boat in the first place, not worry about fire risk when they get here.
And or turn them back in the middle of the channel. Why is the government always opposed to that kind of response to these dinghies? Get them in the middle of the channel and take them back. Why can't we do that?
Well, I think the authorities who'd had to do that have given advice to ministers to say it would be extremely hazardous and dangerous, and there would be the great danger that then a British government intervention in the sea led to drowning or to injury of people involved, because these are very fragile craft they're in, and it would be very easy to destabilise or puncture or damage them when they're not willing to be towed back to France. And you've also got the issue of what the French authorities would do when you turned up with them. I don't think there's any substitute for taking all those necessary legal actions to show that this is not a cheap and easy way into Britain, and it's not a way of someone who is an economic migrant claiming asylum And if we took those legal actions, then I think you would find the demand for these expensive and dangerous boat services declined. And that's why my advice to the Cabinet, again, I say, is get on with the bit of legislation many of us advise you to do in the first place. And you put, notwithstanding the European Convention on Human Rights, this is what the UK courts must decide. And you will then get rid of many of the legal challenges that would otherwise occur. Because we've had an issue with the European Court of Human Rights before, where we didn't ourselves want to give votes to prisoners, and the European Court of Human Rights said we had to, and the UK Parliament said, well, no, we're in charge, we're not going to do so, but we're not going to withdraw from the whole convention just because of that.
Well said. Where do you stand, Sir John, on Lee Anderson, the Deputy Tory Party Chairman, yesterday saying that, or in an interview in the Daily Express, saying that if the migrants won't get onto the barge, if they don't like the idea of the barge, they should, I'm going to use polite language on a family show, they should go back to France. He actually said F off back to France, which of course has sent people like Yvette Cooper, Labour, into fits of moral indignation. The BBC could barely contain itself. In fact, Nick Robinson on the Today Show on Radio 4 misquoted Mr Anderson by saying that he had said if they don't like the barge, they should F off home, which of course has very different connotations to what he said. Now, I think, you know, that Lee Anderson spoke for the people. That's what people are saying in the pubs and the bars, the length and breadth of the country. So I don't know where you stand on an MP, a politician using that kind of language. But of course, it was followed by Diane Abbott, the Labour stalwart, referring to that tragedy off the coast of Italy that you talked about, in which 41 migrants died. She said they have indeed F-offed. They have F-offed to the bottom of the sea. So I would suggest that's really crossing the line. I don't think Lee Anderson did, but it seems the sort of narrative on the BBC and everything is, oh, well, Tories, they mustn't use that kind of language, but it's OK if Labour people do.
Yeah, well, I think it's wrong for MPs of any kind to use that language for whatever cause, and it's not language I would use, and it's clearly not language the government is using. But what I do think is important that anyone speaking for the government not only uses moderate language, but also produces something which is practical and can work. And if you're saying these people should be automatically returned to France, that would require their consent and the consent of the French authorities. Otherwise, you have all sorts of issues about how you exactly do it. And so whilst it's quite easy for someone down the pub to say that because they're really fed up with these people turning up illegally and us having to pay the bills, government can't quite work in that way, which is why I go back to my original point, which is you've got to stop these people coming in the first place. The boats mustn't leave France, and that has to be sorted out by us making it less attractive to come here and by the French authorities cooperating more fully with us. I understand the French authorities are now stopping a lot of the boats coming, but they're not stopping enough of the boats coming, and that is the underlying problem.
Yeah, that was going to be my final question to you, leading on from that. I think it was back in March, something like that, a few months ago. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, was very pleased to hand to Monsieur Macron, the French president, £500 million of taxpayers' money to patrol their beaches properly. I never quite understood why we're supposed to give the French money to patrol their own borders, to govern their own country, but that's what we did. And ever since then, they've been coming over, hundreds a day, 500 a day, that kind of stuff. By the way, similar amounts to what would fill a single barge. So in a single day, quite regularly, more migrants that could get onto the Bibby Stockholm across the channel. What did we get for this £500 million we gave to the French?
Well, ministers would have more detail than I do, but I understand from my conversations with ministers that the French are patrolling much more. They are intercepting many more of the small boats before they leave, and they are conducting proper police inquiries into what is criminal activity in their country. I mean, these are criminals operating unsafe and illegal boat services. They are probably money laundering and tax fiddling. I don't suppose these are regular businesses reporting to the French tax authorities. And so the idea of the British encouragement, cooperation and money to help the French is to get them to target their crime resources more particularly on this type of crime, because it is doing damage to both countries and it is jeopardising the lives of a lot of people who do take to totally inappropriate and overloaded craft in the hope that somebody's going to find them and pick them up.
Sir John Redwood, thank you so much for your time. Always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much. That's Sir John Redwood, Conservative MP, former Cabinet Minister.